All right, we're about to start, please. Great, awesome. There you are. Well, as I was mentioning, we are a little bit estranged from next weekend, so I think it's very good for us to concentrate and to start with our practice. Okay, as I told you tonight, we're going to practice for the fourth task of the speaking section, and that basically means that we're going to be listening to a lot of lectures. All right, so please let us get into this together. Here we are. In a second, I'm gonna start this one more time so that we can begin with the first exercise, not to miss anything. Here and here, and let's start. Okay, so if you remember, let me give you here a very quick summary of what we have been discussing yesterday. Here we have the structure for the fourth task of the speaking section. It consists of 4 different steps, as it has become our tradition somehow. In this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of, and here, well, as you can see, this would be your introductory phrase. And after you mention all this, you have to start with your lecture's title and, well, with your summary as well. This lecture, we've presented to the fascinating topic of, let's say, something like, let's say, Darwin's evolutionary theory, right? And then you continue. The professor said that Darwin was a brilliant scientist that proposed all living things undergo a very, very long process of evolution, stuff like that, right? And you remember, very important, that throughout your summary, you have to mention illustrations, right? The illustrations that the professor said in the lecture, not illustrations of your own. By the way, remember, you don't have to include anything external here, even if you know about the topic. Just limit yourself to describe very much succinctly and as well concisely what the professor said. All points and lectures made in the all points, and illustrations made in the lecture. And very important, this last thing I want to remember you, if you are thinking about, well, what should I include and why I shouldn't include in my response, because of course, as this is a very long information source, what's going to happen is that you are not going to be able to include every single topic or point mentioned, right? Therefore, what you should do instead of mentioning everything is, as I say, decide what could be an essential part or point made in the lecture for you to include it in your summary, and what could not represent such an essential and elementary topic. How can you distinguish? Well, as you can see here, you have 2 different traits. Elementary and central ideas are those ones that the professor spent most time discussing. That is to say, he spent a long, long time discussing those ideas and topics in comparison to others. Okay, if you notice that, that is something that you should definitely include in your summary. Why? Because, as I say, we normally spend more time on that we consider to be important. So if you notice a professor talking about something with a very much distinguished amount of time, well, include it. And if you ask yourself this question, if I include this topic or element, is my reviewer going to understand my summary? If you ask yourself that question, you say, okay, if I don't include this idea in my summary, my reviewer is not even going to notice it because it's not too important, don't include it. But if you say, okay, if I include this, or if I don't include this, my reviewer will not understand because my lecture will be unfulfilled or incomplete if I simply don't mention that topic or idea, because that is elementary and central. All right, well, that is what I wanted to remind you before we start. Okay, here you are. And well, let us start with the practice. So all of you, I hope you have gotten into a very much quiet space, and please, while taking notes, let us listen to this lecture on an academic topic.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a literature class.
Since the time of Aristotle, thinkers have struggled to define the nature of tragedy. You see, in classic literature, a classic tragedy is more than simply a story about an unfortunate occurrence. No, it's much more than that. A classic tragedy is a story about how a heroic person struggles to find happiness. But they somehow have a terrible flaw that negates the possibility of their happiness ever coming about. Nevertheless, tragic heroes will often accept responsibility for their downfall, admitting where they have been at fault. The audience experiences a sense of release or catharsis when they see the transformation of the characters and the nobility of their decision to accept responsibility in even the darkest circumstances. Aristotle believed that Oedipus Rex by the playwright Sophocles was one of the greatest tragedies ever written. It contained all the elements of a classic tragedy: an unsuccessful search for happiness, a tragic flaw, an acceptance of responsibility for one's faults, and catharsis. Oedipus is a heroic man who is quick-witted, strong, and ambitious. He sets out in the world to find happiness. However, his tragic flaw is pride. His pride leads him to kill a total stranger on the road. It also leads him to successfully answer the riddle of the Sphinx, a legendary monster. In gratitude for his achievement, the people of Thebes make Oedipus the king, and he marries the widowed queen of the city. However, a plague soon comes to Thebes, brought on by the anger of the gods. Oedipus eventually finds out that he is the reason for the plague. The stranger that he killed on the road was his father, and the woman that he married was his own mother. The play ends in sadness and disaster as Oedipus blinds himself and his mother commits suicide. However, before this happens, Oedipus apologizes for his pride and takes responsibility for all that happened, leading the audience to experience catharsis, a sense of release, thanks to his heroism in the face of suffering. No wonder Aristotle praised the play so highly.
Using points and examples from the talk, explain why the professor thinks that Oedipus Rex meets the definition of a classic tragedy.
Okay, there you are. Well, Oedipus tragedy, very interesting topic, right? Especially for that people who are, as my own person, very much assiduous readers of philosophy. I think that this was a topic that you found to be very much interesting and striking. Nonetheless, if you didn't find it like that, as I say, you have to get used to this mechanism, because topics here are very much varied. You can receive biology, and in another practice, you can receive medicine, or you can receive arts that is, of course, completely different, right? So the idea is to be able to adapt yourself to the circumstance and to receive with understanding and with very good capacity of retention any topic you can possibly receive. Now, as I say, it's not necessary for any of you to be an expert on any of these areas, because your unique and mere task is to summarize what you are listening. That is to say, you don't have to include anything external. They are not asking you to comment on the material. Therefore, you don't have to be, as I say, a professional on this. Limit yourself to summarize what you listen. Okay, that is your task. Remember, the fourth task basically consists in you being a journalist and summarizing your listening passage. Okay, well, let us start. If you remember, in this case, you will have 20 seconds in order to prepare your responses and 1 minute in order to deliver it. Okay, so all of us, please start preparing our responses now. There you are. Well, let us continue with the exercise. Who's going to start? Dear Angel, could you please help me with this first exercise? Okay, let's go. So please, dear Angel, turn on your microphone and please delight us with your response starting now.
Can you say that again, please?
Oh, yes, yes, why not? Don't worry. Please let us start now.
In this lecture, we have the topic of tragedy. In this lecture, we have the professor talk about some history in tragedy. And this history is talk about how persons struggle on evidence, and something how people release on source. Uh, he mentioned also this is also a story about a widow queen. He's mentioned an interesting story about his own errors makes himself suffers. No, it was very hard. So,
Oh, okay. Don't worry. Don't worry. Thank you, dear Angel. It was good. It was good. Don't worry. Thank you very much. Alexander, please, dear Alexander, you're going to continue, right? So please delight us with your response now.
In this lecture, we have been presented to the fascinating topic about the tragedy, the classic tragedy. We talk about the classic Greek tragedy, in where hero struggle to become happy. So some authors could say that the classic tragedy could be more from accept the responsibility about the downfall in an act of catharsis. The principal person have a transformation. We talk about Oedipus, legendary hero in the Greek mythology. So he found a man and killed in the street and married with a woman and become king. But later he know that that man was your father and the queen that we had married was her mother.
Great. Thank you very much, dear Alexander. There you are. Very good. Thank you. Let us continue with Andre. Please, dear Andre, you're going to be able to respond. Starting, please, now.
In this lecture, we've been presented into the fascinating topic of the tragedy. In this lecture, we basically hear a professor talking that since Aristotle, the nature of the tragedy has been a very interesting topic. The classic tragedy is a story about how a person struggles to find happiness and gives the audience a sense of release by accepting the main character the responsibility of what is happening. A classic is Aripes. Aripes was a king that marries a widow and finds out that he kills a total stranger in the road. Later in this story, Aripes finds that he kills his own father and marries his own mother, and also that he's a reason of an important pledge. This gives an audience the experience of catharsis because he has the ability to accept all his errors.
Great, fantastic. Thank you very much, dear Andre. Very, very good. There you are. Let us continue with Mateo. Please, dear Mateo. Delight us with your response now.
Okay. The lecture talks about the fascinating topics of tragedies. A tragedy is more than a simple story. It's how to find happiness in the darkest times. You can see the transformation and the evolution of the characters. It also talks about a story, a classic story of Oedipus that talks about subjects like pride and taking care of your responsibilities.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Mateo. There you are. And let us finalize with Santiago. Please, dear Santiago, you're going to be closing this one. Start responding now.
In the lecture, we have been immersed in the amazing topic of classic tragedy. In the first point, we can talk about that this type of literature is about a story of a struggle for happiness. And one characteristic of this type of literature is a terrible circumstance that characters pass to search happiness. By the other hand, we can talk about the sense of release of the decisions that they had to take and the unsuccessful search of happiness. One illustration is about the legend of Alcides, that expose an heroic character person that searched happiness, that had to fight with a legendary monster, have to pass a different circumstance. Sadness and disaster is the characteristic of this type of lecture.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Santiago. There you are. Well, great. So let me give you some feedback, all right, to all of you that have responded. I think that response was quite well in all your cases. I think that, well, the only, let's say, pronunciation mistake or, well, pronunciation trouble for all of you was the pronunciation of this hero, right, Oedipus. But nonetheless, it's quite difficult, right, to remember it when you just listen to this lecture once. But Oedipus. Apart from that, I think that with regard to pronunciation, it was brilliant. It was very good. Okay, Angel, I think that your response was very good. Don't worry about not understanding this topic at first. As I say, it's quite a matter of practice to get used to these topics, to listen to them. And my recommendation to all of you, if you want to improve in this part, dear students, is try to get into YouTube and look for classes. For example, if you go to YouTube, let me show you right now. Let's say here, in a second. If you go to YouTube and if you look for, let's say, lectures on, for example, in this case, it was about philosophy, right? On philosophy. You're gonna find something like this, right? Look at this. Philosophy in one lecture. Our professor is discussing this topic, right? And this is an actual professor, so you're gonna be able to listen to this. And as I say, it's not like you have to be an expert or you have to become, as I say, some sort of a scholar on this area. Not at all. But what I recommend you is try to get used to listen to this type of material, because when you get used to listen this type of material, it is easier for you to receive the grammar and to analyze it and to, of course, absorb it. So any type of lecture you watch, for example, this course introduction, or let's say what's the right thing to do. There is some sort of Harvard's lecture or things of that sort, or I don't know, lectures on, I don't know, biology maybe, right? Look at that. Now here you have a lot of lectures, especially introductory lectures. And I think that if you listen to this, you can certainly improve very much your understanding of the syntax and the grammar that professors use when discussing these topics. That is what I want you to learn. Of course, don't memorize things like, for example, the chemical elements, right? Because they are not going to ask you that. This is an example of English. But nonetheless, if you get used to this, it's going to be very much easy, trust me, to understand, all right? Well, there you are. Let us finalize them with this. And let's go to one more example. About Alexander, fantastic as well. Andre, no commentaries, awesome as always. Mateo as well, incredible, and Santiago as well. I think it was very good. All right, let us continue. We have more work. Here we are. Well. Great, so let's go to the second lecture. Let us listen.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a literature class.
In the 8th century BCE, a legendary author named Homer wrote 2 epic poems. You probably know them already, the Iliad and the Odyssey. They're fascinating poems, really, partly because they give us such a clear window to the culture of the time. But what culture or what period of Greek history was Homer describing? His own era or an earlier one? It's an interesting question, but it's very likely there's no real answer. You see, Homer was working in the oral tradition. Before he wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey down, poems were told and retold by generations of storytellers. Each generation added details to the poems, so it's likely that these poems are actually this. They're an interesting mixture of historical details about a bunch of different time periods. So let me give you a couple of examples. Here's one. Homer describes helmets made out of boar tusks. Well, just these kinds of helmets have actually been discovered in sites dating back to the 2nd millennium BCE in Greece. They weren't used in later time periods. That's a pretty clear indication, right? So clearly Homer's poems preserved some authentic details about the distant past, and some would argue that's the era Homer intended to write about. But then we take a look at another detail and it's a bit more nebulous. Homer describes chariots, horse-drawn wagons carrying warriors into battle. He describes them as simply carrying troops on and off the battlefield. That might be how chariots were used in Homer's time, sure, but in earlier history, the time when those helmets might have been used, say, they were used in battles themselves. The chariots, that is. So, this is a good example of Homer adding details from his own world into the poems.
Using points and examples from the talk, explain why the professor thinks there is no real answer to the question of what period of history Homer described.
Well, there you are. So now we have listened to a new lecture, and this time was about two poems written by Homer. And well, you have to summarize such lecture. Let's start, okay? Please, all of you, prepare your responses now. All right, there you are. Okay, so dear Alexander, all right, you're gonna help me to start this round. So please turn on your microphone and please delight us with your response starting now.
In this lecture, we have been presented to the fascinating topic about the poetic, about Homer. Homer was an ancient Greek poet that writes the Iliad and Odyssey. Something interesting about that is the authors. No, many people don't know if it was based on the ancient era or in the era that was lived Homer. There is not that answer for that. And some topics that talk about, it's about helmets. Helmets don't exist in the Homer epoch, and also chariots. So there are like arguments to think that he mixed a lot of topics from the ancient to the him days to make their story.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Alexander. Please, dear Andre, help me with your response, and please start doing so now.
In this lecture, we've been presented into the fascinating topic of literature. Specifically, the professor talks about Homer. Homer was a writer that writes epic poems like the Odyssey, and there's an important debate around their time in their poems. We can find that they actually present different types of periods. For example, by presenting authentic details from the past, like the use of helmets, as well as the chariots that was used in battles, and these ones are a little bit more of the Homer's era. So, in a nutshell, Homer represents a window of different culture eras.
Great, thank you very much, Andre.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Okay, there you are. Very good. Let us continue with Mateo. This year, Mateo, you're going to help us. Please start responding to the question now. Oh, I'm sorry, now.
In this lecture, we've been immersed in the fascinating topic of Homer. He was a writer that writes the Odyssey. And in this Odyssey, he talks about an era, but many people don't know what era is he talking about. What I understand is that he mixed a lot of cultures and a lot of part of different eras, and he made his own story. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Mateo. Very good, right? Fantastic. Santiago, please help me with your response starting now.
In the lecture, we have been immersed in the interesting topic of Homer poems. We can talk about this theme saying that this is the culture of time. The first point is about that Homer, in his own area, the oral tradition was the form that they communicate and translate other information. In his poems, historical details are established, and they have other items about different eras that we used in the second millennium. By the other hand, we can talk about the battlefield that he describes in his poems. They were used in other battles as a historical detail. And with his poems, we can talk about a lot of culture of the humanity.
Right, there you are. Fantastic, thank you very much. And let us finalize this round with our dear Angel. Please, dear Angel, delight us with your response now.
In this lecture, we have been presented a fascinating topic about literature. The professor mentioned that is no, we know a certain about the period or what period is were writing the histories. It corresponds an older or a newer period. And there is an interesting discussion. He mentioned that each culture adds a mix of information about history, and the final result is a mix of different cultures in different times. And also mention some example about that, like the Odyssey or the Hammer. We can say the final result of the history is a mix of different periods of times and how people add more details to the histories.
Okay. Thank you very much. Dear Angel, very good. Well, very, very good. Great, so let me give you some feedback, okay, to all of you. So starting with Alexander, I think it was a fantastic response. I liked the conciseness of it and also how complete it was, your summary. My only very tiny suggestion or commentary would be with regard to the word epoch. You say epoca, right? But nonetheless, in English, when you want to express that terminology, you use epoch, right? Epoch, as if you were making, I don't know, epoch. Like, of course, like the A doesn't sound like epoca. The last letter doesn't sound, but epoch, like that, epoch. Okay, that would be. But apart from that, dear Alexander, fantastic. But remember, epoch. Okay, very good. Andre, fantastic. Only also very tiny recommendation with regard to the pronunciation of the word literature, right? Literature is a very much, I don't know, I would say fast movement with your tongue, literature, but nonetheless, apart from that, excellence as always, okay? Magnificent. Mateo, here I would recommend to avoid expressions like this one, for example, that you mentioned at some point during your response. You said, what I understand was, right, and you continue to explain your summary. I think that, you know, expressing this, although of course you're being sincere here, and that is very much noble of your part, I wouldn't say it is recommendable. Why? Because remember that here you are trying to demonstrate that you indeed listened and understood everything. So it is not a good idea to say, well, I didn't understand this very well, but I'm going to tell you what I managed to receive anyways. So always speak with indicative affirmations. Do you know what is indicative? Indicative is a mode of grammar that basically goes about affirmations. When you say, this is red, that is an indicative statement because you are describing it. You are affirming this is red. Nonetheless, a subjunctive statement would be, this would be red, or this could be red, or this is maybe red. That is subjunctive because you are expressing hesitation, doubts. Nonetheless, when you are speaking in a very indicative mood, your response seems very much, of course, confident, and that is exactly what you want to convey, right? Confidence. So avoid, okay, try to avoid expressions like that one, what I understand, or what I could manage to gather, or things of that sort, are not actually very much beneficial. Okay, but apart from that, fantastic response, dear Mateo. Very, very good. Santiago, I think that your response was also excellent. I loved how you summarized it very much directly. You were straight to the main points and ideas, and that was excellent. And here I would just, let's say, I would just correct a very little pronunciation error. That is items. When you say items, you said items, right? But it's items. Item or items in plural is with the pronounce the letter I as you receive it also in the alphabet. Okay, items. But anyways, apart from that, fantastic, dear Santiago. Angel as well, incredible response when compared to the other one. I think that you have improved quite a lot in this one. And my only also tiny recommendation with regard to pronunciation would be at the end of your response when you actually hesitated, right, about the pronunciation of the word stories or histories. Histories when you refer to the subject, as you know, what your professor teaches you in a class, that is history. But story or stories is when you talk about something that you are telling, right? What happened to you last week or what happened to you in your last birthday, that is in the story. But history or histories are, as I say, subjects of discussion, of the scholar discussion, okay? But apart from that, fantastic, dear wonderful. There you are. Well, let us continue with one more lecture. Let's go. We have left to practice. Very good, okay? By the way, your level is remarkable. I'm very much content with your performances. Very good. Okay, let's continue. Let's go with this new lecture.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a physics class.
Have any of you wondered how exactly planes are able to fly even though they're so much heavier than air? There are actually a couple of ways we can answer that. The first way, the easier way I think, is based on Newton's third law. That law says that when you push something, there is push back. So think about a wing. It's slanted up, right? The front of the wing is higher than the back. And as the plane moves through the air, that air goes under the wing. It gets pushed down by the slant. And when that air is pushed down, as we said, it has to push back. It pushes up. So there's a lot of air getting pushed down by that angle of the wing. And it's all pushing back up, pushing the plane into the air. The second answer has to do with something called Bernoulli's principle, which is about how fluids work. And when I say fluids, that includes gases too, not just liquids. This principle, it says that as the speed of a fluid, in this case air, as the speed of the air decreases, pressure increases. And also, as speed goes up, pressure goes down. So, in other words, the faster the air is moving, the less the pressure. The slower it is moving, the more the pressure. Get it? Speed and pressure are opposite. They're inversely correlated. We won't worry too much about how this works, but just know that because the way a wing is designed, air moves faster on the top of the wing than on the bottom of the wing. So that means the air on top, where the air is moving fast, has low pressure, and the air on the bottom of the wing, where the air is moving slowly, has high pressure. The difference in pressure pushes the wing upward into the sky.
Using points and examples from the lecture, summarize the two explanations of how planes are able to fly.
Well, there you are. Fantastic. Thank you very much, dear students. Okay, so it's time for us to prepare our responses. And please now start doing so right now. Well, thank you very much. There you are. Okay, dear students, well, it's time for us to continue. So this time, our dear Andrea is going to help me, right, to start this responses round. So please, dear Andrea, start responding to the question now.
In this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of physics. Specifically, we heard about how planes are able to fly. The professor gives two important reasons. The first one, Newton's third law. This law explains that if you push something up, it generates an opposite force. And the second reason is the Bernoulli's principle that says that as long the speed of air decreases, the pressure goes down. the professor told us that there's an inverse correlation about the pressure and the speed. So wings are forced up with this pressure. That's
Incredible.
it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Fantastic. There you are. Mateo, please help me with your response. Okay. So please enable your mic and start responding to the question now.
Okay, this lecture talks about how an airplane flies. It's a lot of situations and a lot of systems, but basically are because of the gases and the fluids. Also, is for the speed of air, and the pressure is also pushing down and at the same time push back. And the wings of the airplane are designed for being higher than the back side of the wing. And that's all.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mateo. There you are. Fantastic. There you are. Okay, let's continue with Santiago, please. You're Santiago. Help me with your response starting now.
In the lecture, we have been immersed in the physics theory about how an airplanes are able to fly. The first point, what we can establish about is that how a wing is designed to make it fly. Wing is higher to the back, is pushed higher in the back, and when it's pushed down and about the pressure of air is pushed up. By the other hand, we can talk about the fluids that makes an airplane fly, and we can talk about gas too. In the speed of air, we can say that the pressure makes it fly, and the way of the wing is desired, as I said, is about how a low and high pressure make an airplane fly.
Great. Thank you very much, Santiago. Very good. And let us continue with Angel. Please, your Angel. Delight us with your response starting now.
In this lecture, we have been presenting the fascinating topic of how planes are be able to fly. Professor could give some couple of examples of reasons why this could happen. The first one is the angle of the wing. If we push something, we have opposite force, and the angle of the wing will give a direction of the plane. The second the second reason why planes are be able to fly is the Bernoulli principle. Bernoulli principle are applied on fluids. No, a fluid can be a liquid or a gas. This say while we had an inverse correlation between speed and pressure, while more speed, less pressure, and this is a principle why planes can be able to fly.
Great. There you are. Thank you very much, Angel. Very good. All right. And finally, dear Alexander, you're going to close this round. Okay. So please help me with your response starting now.
This lecture, we have been presented to the fascinating topic of how planes are able to fly. We have two approximations to explain that question. The first is with the third Newton law that says if you push something, they push them back. So in a wing, when it's in movement, push down there, so have a force that push back and could elevate the airplane. The second one is the Bernoulli principle. It talks about fluids, how work, and that include the gases like air. There is a difference between if you have more speed, you have lower pressure, and that different pressure could elevate a plane.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, dear Alexander. Well, so what can I say about your responses, your students? I think that All of them were excellent, considering that this was a very complicated topic, right? Physics, I think that for average people like us, it's very difficult, right? Of course, unless you are somebody whose area of expertise is physics. Now, I think that something that I want to remark, and I also encourage you to continue doing, is that whenever you don't understand a topic because of its technical expressions or terminology, what you have done is actually a very good strategy, because all of you started to simplify the expressions with your own words to make everything simpler, of course, but nonetheless, it was still relevant and still valid, because even when you didn't use the same technical expressions and, of course, syntax that the professor utilized, you were actually conveying the same information with simpler sentences, right? And I think that is certainly valid. As I say, this is not a matter of demonstrating that your complex is at the same level of Harvard professors or something like that. But the idea is to demonstrate that you are able to speak fluently, concisely, intelligently, and with a good vocabulary. And I think that all of you have done so. So I congratulations this one, and I recommend you to do that every single time. Whenever you don't understand something very well because of the grammar or the technical expressions that are mentioned, don't worry. I mean, the reviewer understands that there are topics that are complicated for most people, and they know that, and of course, they are going to be very much, well, let's say, disposed in order to receive such simplified expressions that are anyways valid, as I say. Okay, let us go and practice with one more example so that you can have a rest, well, knowing that you have practiced a lot for this task. And let us start with this new lecture. Okay, so please take your notes and let us listen to this lecture on an academic topic. Let's go.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a sociology class.
Let's consider the way sociologists use the terms culture and society. A society is a distinct group of people. A sociologist would say that people in a society are defined by their social interactions and the culture they share. Meanwhile, culture itself can be defined as that society's shared knowledge, beliefs, and expectations. Often people think of a society as something really, well, big. And sure, that's true. An entire nation, for example, will generally have some common thread of culture that defines it. The most obvious example is that citizens of one region generally speak a common language. But think about behavioral standards too, like what's considered polite or impolite. Whereas in one country you might be expected to take off your shoes as the guest in another's home, in other countries that might be considered strange. Cultural traits like that can extend over enormous populations. But a society can also be much smaller, much simpler. Take this class. Aren't we a society? We have social interactions with each other every week. And I think it's fair to say we have a culture of a sort too. Think back to what happened on the second day of class. Do you all remember? I'd missed my train and didn't have any way to let you all know that I'd be late. But in contrast to other classes, where students might have just headed home 15 minutes after the planned start time, each and every one of you waited the full 30 minutes it took me to arrive. That kind of set expectations, right? It laid the foundation for a culture of patience, something I think is still true of this particular group, this little society.
Using points and examples from the lecture, explain how a society can be a large group of people or a very small group.
There you are. Well, it is time for us to prepare our responses, dear students. Okay, so please let us get into that. Okay, 20 seconds are available for you to prepare your responses, and please start doing so now. All right, great. Now that your 20 seconds on the call have ended, it's time for you to respond. All right. So who's going to help me this time? Dear Santiago, please, you're going to start with this response. So please start delighting us with it now.
In the lecture, we have been immersed in the interest topic of culture and society, part of the sociology. In the first point, we can talk about people is in interaction, in a social interaction that makes sense of this type of topic. The belief and the expectation are the terms that we can describe the culture and the society about the sociology. Citizens of a one region have a type of language, and this is one example about this topic. And or by the other hand, we can talk what is polite or what is impolite in different cultures and or in different regions. It changes in different type of persons. And for the last one, we can talk about society and the type of little society where we're talking about, like the classroom, for example, that the professor established.
Okay. Thank you very much, dear Santiago. Very good. All right. Let us continue with our dear Mateo. Please, dear Mateo, you're going to continue, right? So please start responding to the question now.
Okay. In this lecture, we've been immersed in the fascinating topic of culture and society. People is defined in a society by the social interaction. For example, it can be the language, and it can be like a lot of parts of a culture, like taking out the shoes in getting into the house. It depends on the culture what is accepted and what is not. That's all.
All right. Thank you very much, dear Mateo. There you are. Please, dear Andre, help me with your response starting now.
This lecture will be presented into the fascinating topic of sociology, specifically about culture society. A culture society is a distinct group of people that has social interactions, beliefs, and expectations. We can often think of this society as something big, as a country, because we can find some behaviors and some patterns, like, for example, taking the shoes, that could be acceptable in some places and in some other no. But a society can also be smaller. A class can also be a society. The professor told us an example that when he was late for the class, all the students in the class waited to the professor, and this is an example of an expectation that they all share.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Brett. Dear Angel, you're going to continue. So please help me with your response now.
In this lecture, we have been present the fascinating topic of sociology, specifically the difference between culture and society. For example, in a culture, professor mentioned that a culture shares knowledge, belief, and expectation. A culture is something bigger. For example, in a region, people can share a language, and this could be an example of a culture. On the other hand, an example of society could be is as smaller and simple. An example of society could be a class. Professor mentioned that the second day of his class, he arrived late, and the reaction of the student could be an example of expectation inside a society, and this is the difference between the two concepts.
Great. Thank you very much, Angel. Very good. And let us finalize with Alexander, right? So please, dear Alexander, delight us with your response now.
In this lecture, we have been presented to the fascinating topic of sociology, specific cultures and society. Society as a group of people that have social interactions, and that interactions are defined by the culture. Culture, that the way that they share opinion, beliefs, and expectations, that could be from an entire nation to more smart group of peoples that could have common languages and also ways to define what is polite or don't be polite, like the example of shoes that would be acceptable or not, depend the left shoes out of the house would be acceptable or not, depend on the culture, and give us an example about a small society like the class, and tell us about the story when the professor will be late, and all them waiting to him as an expectation.
Great. Thank you very much, dear Alexander. There you are. Well, so I can say about your responses, fantastic. I like how this time you certainly decided to, well, as this was an easier topic to mention and to risk a little bit more with regard to the grammar, and you try to make more complex statements. Fantastic. I think that is, of course, a matter of balance and deciding by yourself, right? According to your circumstance, what is that that particular decision and that particular response that suits you the most, right? But fantastic. I think that it was great. So let me give you here something for you, all right, that I know you will appreciate very much. Here I have prepared a Google Drive file that contains within it, as you can see, let me show you, a video that, well, basically contains a lot of lectures as the ones that we have been using, all right? And this is going to be material that is completely free for you that you can use in order to practice for this task in your free time.
All right.
As you can see,
Now that you all
it's a lecture, right? So please get into this, download the video and practice by yourself whenever you have free time in order to improve for this section even more, because as I said, your responses were incredible, quite remarkable, and I think that you are certainly going to succeed in this particular task because, well, your level is very, very good, all right? So thank you very much for your attention. We're gonna stop here. Please, I need to take your assistance, don't go, right? And well, as I say, I think that until this point, we have been discussing the speaking section, but tomorrow we're going to change our topic to the to the writing section. So please don't miss tomorrow's class because I think it's going to be essential for you to later on practice the writing section with us in the end, or excuse me, at the end of the week. Well, help me with the traditional poll, okay? Your students that we always feel, you know that you help me a lot, okay, with it. So now I'm going to take your assistance and listen to your names, okay? Or if you have any questions, please make sure to ask them right now. All right. Okay. Hasmin Azucena. Right, she wasn't here with us tonight. She sent a message right to the WhatsApp group saying that she had some sort of energy trouble. So sad, right? Well, and thank you very much for your responses, dear students. Please, could you help me with one more poll? Remember that on Wednesdays we have to follow 2 polls. But nonetheless, please, I'm so sorry for bothering you, okay? Help me with that one as well. Okay, your screen, please. And Reyes Andre.
Here I am.
Thank you
Present.
very much, Andre. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Paula Andrea, Coronel. Well, she's not been here. Andrea Mercedes. All right. Alexander David.
Present.
Thank you very much, Alexander. There you are. Ángel Intriago.
Present.
Thank you very much, dear Ángel. Antesana Mateo.
Present. Sorry.
Thank you very much. No, it's okay. Thank you very much, Mateo. Sergio Santiago.
Present.
Thank you very much, dear Santiago. Sara is not with us tonight. Well, and finally we have Kevin. Kevin, I see this. All right. It wasn't present tonight. Okay, thank you very much, okay, dear students, for your responses. It was fantastic to be with you tonight. I'm gonna see you tomorrow. Please don't miss tomorrow's class. It's so important, trust me, because the writing section is, although, in my opinion, easier than this one, it necessarily requires a theoretical basis for you to perform adequately on that task, all right? So please, I'll see you tomorrow and have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you very
Night,
much.
Carlos, and
Thank
good
you very
night
much.
to all. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Oh yeah, my pleasure. Thank you very much, Andre. See you later.
Bye.